3. Blood. By all that's holy, Knaak! What have you done? Knaak, my friend, perhaps you should take that glove off. Blood. Damn you! Damn you! Satan, his wrist! Cut! Blood. Everywhere. Knaak! For God's sake! My arm! Knaak! Knaak! The blood of those closest to him. No! No! Knaak raised his head, screaming before he even knew he had awakened. A chill wind snapped him to full consciousness for the first time. He noticed the intense pain in his right cheek. Without thinking much, he put a hand to that cheek. Cold metal brushed his skin. With a start, Knaak looked at the hand. A hand clothed in crimson gauntlet. A reddish liquid now staining the fingertips. Blood. With great trepidation, he returned his hand to his cheek, touching the flesh with one finger now. By that means, Knaak discovered that he bled in 3 places. 3 valleys had been gouged in his cheek, as if some animal had clawed him. Ulrich! A flash of memory sent shivers through the veteran. Satan's face contorted in fear, not witnessed by Knaak outside of the most horrible field of battle. Satan's eyes pleading, his mouth open, but no more words escaping. Satan's hand tearing desperately at his friend's face. No! It could not be as Knaak remembered it. Another image. Faughton on the floor of the tomb, blood pooling on the stones nearby. Its source, the gaping hole where the Vajara's throat had once been. The sorcerer, at least, had died relatively quickly. No! 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 Growing more horrified by the moment, the half-mad soldier struggled to his feet. Around him, he noticed tall hills, even mountains, and the first glimmers of sunlight. Yet none of them looked at all familiar. None of them at all resembled the peak in which he and his friends had discovered the tomb of Bartek. Knaak took a step forward, trying to get his bearings. An unsettling creaking accompanying every motion. Knaak looked down to discover that not only his hands were clad in metal, armor. Everywhere he stared, Knaak only saw the same blood-colored metal plates. He had thought that his shock and horror could not possibly grow worse, but simply gazing at the rest of his body nearly threw the formerly steady soldier into complete panic. His arms, his torso, his legs, the same crimson armor now hid all. To add to the mockery, Knaak saw that he even wore Bartek's ancient but still serviceable leather boots. Bartek, the warlord of blood. Bartek, whose dark magic had apparently saved the helpless soldier at the price of Satan and the sorcerer's lives. Damn you! Gazing down at his hands again, Knaak tore at the gauntlets. He tugged as hard as he could on the first, the left, and the right. Yet regardless of which Knaak sought to remove, the metal glove slid no more than an inch before seeming to catch. He peered within and, after seeing no impediment, tried once more, but still the gauntlets would not come off. Worse, as sun rose, for the first time Knaak could see that the blood from his injured cheek had not been only stains upon the metal. Each finger, even most of each palm, looked as if it had been bathed in a rich red dye. But it was not the dye that covered them. Faughton, he murmured. Satan. With a roar of outrage, Knaak swung fist at the nearest rocks, perfectly willing to break every bone in his hand if it would only mean the release of his hand. Instead, though, the rock itself gave way in part, the only damage to Knaak being a violent throbbing throughout his entire arm. He dropped to his knees. No! The wind howled, seeming to mock him. Norik remained where he was, head cast down, arms dangling. Fragments of what had happened in the tomb flashed through his mind, each painting a scene most diabolic. Satan and Fotzen, both dead. Both dead by his hands. Norik's head jerked up again. Not exactly by his hands. The damn gauntlets! One of which had saved him from the ghoulish sentinels had done this. Norik still blamed himself for much of those deaths, for perhaps he might have altered matters if he had removed the first gauntlet immediately. But by himself, he would have never slaughtered his friends. There had to be a way to remove the gloves, even if he had to peel them off piece by piece, taking some of his skin with the metal. Determined to do something for himself, the veteran fighter rose again, trying to better identify his surroundings. Unfortunately, he saw a little more now than he had on first glance. Mountains and hills. Forests stretching to the north. No sign of habitation. Not even a distant plume of smoke. And again, nothing resembling the peak in which Bartok's tomb lay. Where in the hell? He broke off quickly, uneasy at every mentioning the dark and supposedly mythic realm. Even as a child, and certainly as a soldier, Norik had never believed much in either demons or angels, but the horde to which he had been part of had changed some of his opinions. Whether or not demons or angels truly existed, the warlord of blood had certainly left a monstrous legacy. A legacy of which Norik hoped to rid himself quickly. Hoping that perhaps he had simply been too upset the first time he had tried to remove the gauntlets, Norik decided to inspect them in yet greater detail. However, as he looked down, he made yet another horrific discovery. Not only did blood soil the gloves, it did so the breastplate too. Worse, on closer study, Norik saw that the blood had not accidentally splattered their armor, but had been purposely and methodically spread across it. Again, he shuddered. Quickly returning to the gauntlets, he saw some latch, some catch, even some dent that might have caused the gloves to stick. Nothing held the gauntlets fast. By rights, they should have slid off his hands with a simple shake toward the ground. The armor. If he could not remove the gauntlets, surely he could unfasten the outer pieces. Some had catches readily seen, and even with the gauntlets, he surely would have not had much trouble undoing them. Other pieces would not have any catches, having been simply designed to slide on and off. Bending down, Norik tried one leg. He fumbled at the catches at first, then saw how best to secure his hold. With great care, the soldier forced the catch open, and immediately it snapped shut. He forced it open again, only to have the same result. Norik cursed, attempting to catch the third time. This time, it would not even open. Attempting several others resulted in the same frustrating results. Worse, when he tried, at least, to remove the boots, that, despite the cold, they were like the gauntlets, slid only so far before refusing to give away. This can't be possible! Norik tugged harder, but again, with no visible success. Madness! These were only gauntlets, pieces of metal, and a pair of old sturdy boots. They had to come off! Norik's desperation rose. He was a common man, a man who believed that the sun rose in the morning and the moon at night. Birds flew and fish swam. People wore clothes, but clothes never wore people. He glared at the bloody palms. What do you want of me? What do you want? No sorrowful voice arose from around him, telling him of his dark fate, The gauntlets did not suddenly draw words or symbols in the earth. The armor simply would not let go of its new wearer. Scattered images of his companions' gruesome ends once more tumbled about in his thoughts, making it hard for Norik to focus. Norik prayed, pleaded for them to go away, but suspected that they would forever torment him. Yet, if he could never be rid of the nightmares, there might be something he could do about the cursed suit he wore. Fotzen had been a sorcerer of some reputation, but even the Vajra had admitted that there were many practitioners more skilled, more knowledgeable than he. Nark would just have to find one of them. He looked east, then west. To the east he saw nothing but a tall and menacing mountains, whereas the west seemed a bit more gentle in scope. True, Newark might be able to work under false assumptions, but his best hope, he decided, had to be the latter direction. The cold wind and moisture already chilling him to the bone, the weary veteran started off on his tremendous trek. It might be that he would die of exposure before he even made it to the mountains, but some of him suspected that much would not be so. Bartek's armor had not seized him simply to let him die in the middle of the wilderness. No, it likely had some other notion in mind, one that would make itself known with time. Nork did not look forward to that revelation at all. The sun vanished into an overcast sky, turning the weather even colder. A wetness also hung in the air. Breathing heavily, Nork pushed on despite everything. As of yet, he had not so much as seen a glimpse to hint to he traveled the right direction. For all the weary veteran knew, he had headed in the exact opposite of where he should have gone. Some mountain kingdom could have just passed the next peak to the east. Thoughts like that, however frustrating, managed to keep Nork from completely going mad. Each time he let his thoughts wander, they ever returned to the tomb and the horror of which he had been part. Fotzen and Satan's faces haunted him, and every now and then Nork imagined he saw the pair condemning him for this shadow or that. They were dead, and, unlike the bloody warlord, they would stay so. Only Nork's guilt continued to condemn him. Around midday, he began to stumble. It finally occurred to him that he neither had eaten nor drunk since he had woken, and a day before he had last supped early. Unless he planned to fall over and soon die, Nork had to find some substance of some sort. But how? He had no weapons, no trap. Water he could find simply by scooping up some of the snow topping the nearby rocks. But actual food looked to be hard to come by. Deciding he could at least dissuade his thirst, Nork walked over to a small outcropping where the coolness of the shadows had kept a small bit of snow and ice still unmelted. He scooped up what he could and greedily sucked on it, not caring at all about the bits of dust and grass that came with it. In moments, his head seemed to clear a bit. Spitting out a few fragments of dirt, Nork pondered what to do next. Not once had he seen any wild animal other than a bird. Without a bow or slingshot, he had no chance to bring down one of the creatures. Yet he needed food. His left hand suddenly moved without any regards as to his wishes. The fingers separated and bent inward, almost as if now Nork clutched an invisible spear. The gauntleted hand then turned until the palm faced the landscape just before the stunned fighter. From his lip burst a single word. Jezarat! The ground a few feet ahead buckled. Norik at first thought that a tremor had struck the area, but only a small crevice, perhaps 6 feet by 3, actually formed. The rest of his surroundings did not so much as shiver in the slightest. His nose wrinkled as noxious fumes arose from the minute, but apparently a deep fissure. The air burned where yellow tendrils of smoke spread. Iskara Woyuta. The new words came out of his own mouth with great furiosity. From within the fissure came a horrid, chattering sound. Knaak sought to back up, but his feet would not move. The chattering increased, now a babble of high-pitched, animalistic sounds. Knaak barely stifled a gasp as a grotesque tusk face thrust itself somewhat unwillingly into the overcast day. A pair of jagged, curved horns rose from the top of that scaly head. Round yellow orbs with blazing red pupils shied away from the sky, finally focusing with clear bitterness on the human. The creature's squat, porcine nose twitched as if smelling something terrible, something that the fighter realized likely was him. Twin sets of 3-digit talons seized hold of the sides of the fissure as the horrific beast pushed itself up to the surface. Squat, oversized feet with curved nails planted themselves on the ground. Knaak stared down at the thing surely out of the underworld, a vaguely humanoid, hunchback denizen of the depths whose, while barely reaching his waist, revealed surprisingly muscle under his skin, both scaled and furred. And then a second of the creatures joined the first. He immediately followed by a third, a fourth, a fifth. The frightful pack ceased growing in numbers after the sixth. A half a dozen, more than Knaak certainly desired. The demonic imps chattered in their incomprehensible language, obviously upset with being here, and very clear upon whom they blamed this entire situation. A few opened toothy maws and hissed at Knaak, while others simply scowled. Gastar Iscari! The strange words once more startled him, but their effect on the monstrous pack proved even more astonishing. All signs of defiance faded abruptly as the imps groveled before him, some fairly burying themselves in the ground to prove how lowly they were. Dobro Sassy! Dobro Sassy! Whatever the phrase meant, it sent the horned brutes scurrying in outright panic. Squealing and chattering, they headed off in different directions as if their very lives depended on it. Knaak exhaled. Each time unknown words sprang from his lips, it felt as if his heart stopped. The language sounded akin to that used by Fatsen and other Vajari whom the veteran had made acquaintance over the years, but it also sounded harsher, darker than anything Knaak's muttered friend had ever spouted, even in the worst of battles. He had no time to think any more on the subject, for suddenly chattering arose in the distance. Knaak peered to the south, saw two of the monstrous loping back, the bloody torn remains of a goat dragging behind them. He had been hungry, and now the soup provided him with his idea of sustenance. Knaak blanched at the sight of the carcass. He had, of course, often slaughtered animals for fun, but the imps had taken some delight in capturing and slaying the unfortunate goat. The head had nearly been ripped off from the body, and the legs dangled as if all broken. A portion of the goat's flank had been torn away, the blood flowing from the massive wound, leaving a stream of crimson behind. The grotesque creatures dropped the animal in front of Knaak, then backed away. Even as they did, a third member of their pack returned, this one carrying a small bloody carcass with vague similarities to a rabbit. Eyeing the grisly offerings, the wary veteran looked for anything he himself might still consider edible. Exceptional hunters, the tusked beasts might be, but their handling left much to be desired. The other imps returned within moments, each bearing their own prizes. One, a tattered looking lizard, Nork immediately dismissed. The others, a pair of rabbits. He finally chose in preference to what had been first given to him. As he reached for them, his left hand again rebelled. The gauntlet passed over the rabbits, and as it did, incredible heat threatened to sear Nork's fingers. Damn you! He managed to stumble back a step. The heat faded away again quickly, but his hand still throbbed from the near burning. From where the imps chattered, this time sounding quite amused at his discomfort. However, a quick and furious glance silenced them. His hand nearly normal again, Nork returned his attention to the rabbits and found them completely cooked. The scent that arose from them even smelled of certain spices, all enticing. So, don't think I'm gonna thank you for all this, he muttered to no one in particular. Hunger overtaking his good sense, the graying warrior tore into the surprisingly well-prepared meat. He devoured not only one, but both rabbits with ease. Large, they eventually silenced the cry in his stomach, leaving him to ponder what to do with the rest. Nork waited, expecting the suit to make decisions for him, but nothing happened. The pack still watched him, but their gazes often slipped to the meat. Finally giving Nork his own answer, he raised his hand, indicating the goat and the other slaughtered creature, and waved toward the imps. They needed no further invitation. With a manic glee that made the seasoned veteran push away, the tiny horde fell upon the meat. They tore into the flesh, sending gobbets of blood flying everywhere. Nork's own meat grew queasy in his stomach as he watched the demons strip the bones of anything they could devour. He imagined those same claws and teeth on him. Varash! So disturbed by the sight before him, Nork barely reacted to the harsh word bursting from his mouth. The imps recoiled as if struck. Cowed, they seized what remained of the goat's carcass and dragged it toward the fissure. With some effort, the grotesque creatures deposited the remains in the crevice, then one by one followed after it. The last gave the human a quick and highly curious glance, then vanished into the bowels of the earth. Before Nork's wondering eyes, the crevice sealed itself, leaving no trace of his existence. Walking dead, haunted armor, demons from the underworld. Nork had witnessed magic in the past, even heard tales of dark creatures, but nothing could have ever prepared him for all that had happened since he had first entered that cave. He wished that he could go back and change events, make the decisions to leave the tomb before the guardians had risen to slay his band, but Nork knew he could no more do than peel the cursed suit from his body. He needed rest. The trek had been an arduous one, and with the food in his stomach, the desire to go on had faded, at least for the time being. Better to sleep than continue on refreshed. Perhaps his thoughts would also clear, enable him to better think how to extract himself from this terrifying situation. Nork leaned back, stretching out. After so many years on the battlefield, any spot served as good as another when it came to finding a bed. The armor would make matters uncomfortable, but the tired soldier had suffered worse in that respect. What in? His arms and legs pushed him back up to a standing position. Nork tried to sit down. No part of his body beneath his neck obeyed. His arms dropped, swinging from the shoulders as if every muscle had been cut. Nork's left foot stepped forward. His right followed after. I can't go on, damn you! I need some rest! The suit cared not a whit, picking up the pace. Left, right. An hour. 2 at the most! That's all I need! His word echoed uselessly through the mountains and hills. Left, right. Whether the hapless veteran liked it or not, he would continue his arduous journey. But to where? This should have never have happened, Kara nervously thought. By the will of Rothma, this should have never have happened. The emerald sphere that she had conjured earlier in order to see gave the entire tableau an even more unsettling appearance. Her face, already pale in color, paled further. Kara pulled her lengthy black cloak about her, taking some comfort from with its warmth. Under thick lashes, silver almond-shaped eyes surveyed a scene that her master surely never could have envisioned. The tomb is forever safe, they had always insisted. Where Vajra elemental sorcery falters, our own trusted skills will make the difference. But now both the more materialistic Vajra and the pragmatic followers of Rathma had apparently failed in their trust. That which they had sought to forever bury from the sight of men had not only been discovered, but had actually been stolen. Or was there more to it? How powerful could the intruders have been to not only eliminate the undead guardians, but also shatter the unbreakable wards? Now so powerful that 2 of them had not died in very violent fashion, moving with such grace that she seemed almost to glide. The black-clad woman went to the nearest of the corpses. Kara leaned down and, after pushing back several tresses of lengthy, raven-colored hair, inspected the remains. A wiry man, a battle-scarred war veteran from one of the distant western lands. Not a pleasant-looking man, even before someone had completely twisted his head around and nearly torn off his arm. The dagger in his chest, surely an exercise in excess, looked to be his own, which had killed him. Even the necromancer could not say, not yet. The gaping wound had bled well, but not as much as it normally should have. Yet why cut the victim open after snapping his neck? As silent as death, the slim but curvaceous young woman made her way to the other body. This one she immediately recognized as the Vajra, which did not surprise her in the least. Always meddling, always seeking methods by which to gain advantage over one another, the Vajra made untrustworthy allies at best. If not for them, this entire situation would never have occurred. Bartek and his brother had followed the early teachings of the Vajra, especially their reckless use of demons for more powerful spells of sorcery. Bartok had especially excelled in that respect, but his constant interactions with the Dark Ones had twisted his own thinking, making him believe that demons were his allies. They in turn had fed off his growing evil, kindred spirits from both the mortal and infernal planes. And although Horizon and his fellow mages had slain Bartek and defeated his demon host, they had found it impossible to destroy the warlord's very corpse. The armor, known to bear several sinister enchantments, had continued to try to serve its function, protecting its master even in death. Only the fact that Bartek had failed to cover his throat properly had even allowed his foes to decapitate the villain in the first place. left with a head and torso that they could not readily burn. The Vajra had come to Kara's own people, searching the dense jungle for the reclusive practitioners of a sorcery that balanced life and death, a sorcery that caused the wielders to be branded necromancer. Together, the two diverse orders worked hard to make certain that Bartek's remains forever vanished from the face of the world. Hopefully, even the warlord's enchantments fading to nothing with time. Kar touched the crimson-soaked throat of the dead sorcerer, noting how most of it had been ripped away with savageness beyond that of most animals. Unlike the fighter, the mage had died very quickly, if still brutally. His eyes stared up at her, the horror of what had happened to him still evident. His expression remained a mix of shock and disbelief, almost as if he could not believe who his murderer had been. Yet, how could some force slay a Vajra and still fail to stop the other thieves? They had just been fortunate, barely escaping. Kara frowned. With the undead and guardians gone and the ward shattered, what had remained that could have hunted the intruders? What? She wished the others had come with her, but that had not been possible. They had been needed elsewhere. Everywhere, it seemed. A general ground swelling of forces so very dark had been sensed not only throughout Kyrgyzstan, but also Skosklin. The faithful of Rathma had been spread thinner than in any other period of their existence, and that left only her, one of the youngest and less tested of her faith. True, like most of those who had followed the path of Rathma, she had been trained to be independent, and almost from birth, but now Kara felt she entered territory for which no amount of teaching or experience could have prepared her for. Perhaps, though, this Vajra could still teach her something about what she now faced. From her belt, Kara removed a delicate but highly resilient dagger, the blade of which had been fashioned in a back and forth serpentine manner. Both the blade and the handle had been carved from the purest ivory, but there again appearances deceived. Kara would have willingly pitted her own knife against any other, knowing full well that the enchantments placed on it made it stronger and more accurate than most normal weapons. With neither distaste nor eagerness, the necromancer touched the point to one of the bloodiest areas on the dead Vajra's ravaged throat. She turned the blade over and over until the tip had been completely covered. Then, holding the dagger hilt down, Kara muttered her spell. The deep red splotches on the tip flared bright. She muttered a few more words, concentrating. The splotches began to change, to grow. They moved as if alive, or remembering life. Kara, called Night Shadow by her teachers, flipped the dagger over, then thrust the point into the floor. The blade sank in halfway, not at all impeded by the hard rock surface. Stepping back quickly, Kara watched as the ivory dagger became engulfed by the swelling splotches, which then melded together, creating a vaguely human form, little taller than the weapon. Drawing patterns in the air, the necromancer uttered the second and final part of her incantation. In the blaze of the red light, a full-sized figure materialized where the ivory dagger had stood. Completely crimson from head to toe, skinned to garments, he stared at her with vacant eyes. He wore the clothes of a Vajra sorcerer, the same clothes, in fact, that the corpse on the floor behind him wore. Kara eagerly beheld the phantasm, bearing the likeness of the dead mage. She had done this only once before, and under conditions much more favorable. What stood before her most mortals would have called a ghost, a spirit, but in doing so, they would have only partially been correct. Drawn forth from the life's blood of the victim, it indeed bore some traces of the dead spirit, but to fully summon a true specter would have taken more time and trouble, and Kara had to act in haste now. This phantasm would surely serve to answer her questions. "Name yourself!" she demanded. The mouth moved, but no sound came from it. Nonetheless, an answer formed in her mind. "Fatson." "What happened here?" The phantasm started, but did not answer. Kara cursed herself for a fool, realizing that it could not only answer questions in a simple way. Taking a breath, she asked, "Did you destroy the undead?" "Some." "Who destroyed the rest?" Hesitation. Then, "Norik." "Norik." The name meant nothing to her. A Vajeri? A sorcerer? To her surprise, the spectral form shook his crimson head ever so slightly. "Norik Vizeran." The name again. The last part of Vizeran meant servant of the Vajeri in the old tongue. But that information helped Kara little. This path led her nowhere. She turned to a different and far more important subject. Did this Norik take the armor from the dais? And again the phantasm shook his head ever so slightly. Kara frowned, recalling nothing in her teachings mentioning this. Perhaps Jeri made for more unusual summonings. She pondered her next question with care. With the limitations of the phantasm, the necromancer realized that she could spend all day and night asking and yet still receive no knowledge of value to her mission. Kara would have to... A sound came from the passage behind her. The young enchantress whirled about. For just the briefest moment, she thought she saw a slight bluish light deep within, but it vanished so quickly that Kara had to wonder if she imagined it. It could have simply been a glow bug or some other insect. But cautiously approaching the tunnel, Kara wearily peered into the darkness. Had she been too hasty in heading directly to the main chamber? Could this Norik have been hiding outside, waiting for someone to come? Absurd. But Kara had heard a noise. Of that, she felt certain. And at that moment, she heard it again, and this time much farther into the passage. Muttering a spell, Kara formed a second emerald sphere, which she immediately sent fluttering down the rocky corridor. As it darted along, the dark-haired woman followed after for a few steps, trying to make out what she could. Still no sign of another intruder. But Kara could not take another chance. Anyone who could so readily slay Vajeri certainly offered deadly threat. She could not simply ignore the possibility. Taking a deep breath, the necromancer started down the rocky passage and froze a moment later. Swearing at herself for her carelessness, Kara had left her prized dagger behind, and she dared not face a possible foe without it. Not only did it provide her with protection both in the mundane and magical senses, but by leaving it behind, the dark mage even risked possibly losing it to whomever might be stalking the tomb. She quickly stepped back into the chamber, already preparing in her mind the spell to dismiss the phantasm, only to find that the crimson figure had already vanished. Kara managed but one more step before a further realization struck her as hard. What the phantasm had vanished, her precious dagger. Yet that alone did not leave her now wide-eyed and unable to even speak. Both the body of the sorcerer Fatson and his slighter companion had also disappeared.